I've been there in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've seen them. And you can smell it in the air. You can sometimes see it. And when these troops came home, many of them the fittest and best trained warriors that we ever sent anywhere were exposed to these burn pits. They weren't the same. And thousands of troops and had to live in their hooches not far from proximity from these burn pits. The one in Iraq, my son was about 400 yards from one of the burn pits, living there for a year in his hooch. They breathe that toxic material sometimes for months at a time. In the case of my son and his buddies, for an entire year, causing headaches, numbness, dizziness, cancer. This is not about my son, but just an example of how close it was. My son, Bo, was one of those persons. He went with the fittest guy in his unit and came home and he came home but died of glioblastoma. It's personal for my family, but it's also personal for so many of you. Secretary of the VA, McDonough, and I just had a long talk. He couldn't be here today, but he can tell you we're determined to address this problem, come hell or high water, and compensate these veterans and their families who have suffered from the consequences of this tragedy. It was part of my unity agenda, as I called it, when I did my first last State of the Union, to try to bring the country together on things I thought we all could agree on. First was beating the opioid epidemic, and we're working like hell on that, tackling mental health crisis, and there is a mental health crisis in America. Supporting our veterans. Look, I delivered that speech in March of last year, and a few months later, in August, with veterans groups making the case and never giving up, the bipartisan PACT Act was on my desk to sign into law. Don't tell me we can't get things done when we work together. Democrats and Republicans work together to get that done. In particular, I want to thank Senator John Tester, the chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and Representative Mark Takano as well, the ranking member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, for their leadership. They never stopped fighting on behalf of the veterans and their families. We learned a horrible lesson after Vietnam, how harmful effects of exposure to Agent Orange took years to manifest themselves in veterans, leaving too many veterans unable to access care when they needed and deserved it. And they had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that was the cause of their problem, which was difficult to prove in the long term. That's why I supported the Agent Orange Act of 1991, supporting veterans exposed to the harmful substances in Vietnam. Well, I don't want to see that again. The PACT Act means today's veterans and their families won't suffer the same painful, frustrating delays and denials. And here's what the law does. It empowers the Veterans Administration, the VA, to move quicker to determine if a veteran qualifies for the benefits of the law. Benefits like monthly disability compensation and regular toxic exposure screenings. It also means new facilities, new research, and more healthcare workers at VA hospitals. It includes nearly, and one of the veterans raised this to me today, nearly $30 million for new outpatient clinics right here in Salt Lake City, right here. And for families who have suffered the ultimate loss, it means potential access to life insurance, tuition benefits for their surviving family members, home loan assistance, and monthly stipends, which cannot replace one of the breadwinners in their home, but it sure in hell can help. For example, surviving spouse of a veteran who died from toxic illness with 2 children could be eligible for roughly $2,300 a month for the rest of his or her life. I'm proud to announce that over 340,000 veteran survivors are already benefiting the law just 1 year after it was signed, including over 2,000 veterans here in Utah. Veterans are getting the care they deserve in every corner of the country. For example, there's an Army veteran served in Iraq now receiving care for prostate cancer at the VA in Seattle. He heard about the PACT Act and he applied for benefits the day I signed the law. Because he's already a VA patient, he didn't need to submit medical records or get separate exams. His application was approved. He's now received retroactive payments from the date the law was signed. Another Army veteran, now in New Hampshire National Guard with multiple deployments to Iraq and Kuwait, learned that he had that a friend and a soldier she deployed with were diagnosed with breast cancer. Just in case, she decided to get toxic exposure screening free at all veterans enrolled in the VA healthcare. She, too, was diagnosed with breast cancer. They caught the cancer early, and she's currently being treated for it. And she's being granted 100% service-connected eligibility under the PACT Act, tripling her monthly payment benefits. For folks, it matters. This matters. Folks, we have a moral obligation. This goes beyond the financial. We have a moral obligation to respond to this. And I'm here today to spread the word so every veteran or surviving family member knows how to access benefits of this law. Because these conditions have already taken such a toll on so many veterans and their families, I directed the Department of Veterans Affairs to treat all 23 presumptive conditions in this law as applicable immediately, like chronic bronchitis, asthma, many types of cancer, including any type of reproductive cancer. And something we've been fighting for a long time. Vietnam-era veterans are entitled to compensation for hypertension. This is now the law. Let me give you an example of why it matters. The widow of a 28-year Army veteran in Connecticut applied for survivor benefits after her husband died from gastrointestinal cancer. That was before the PACT Act was passed, and her claim was denied. In April of this year, she learned about the PACT Act and reapplied. 1 month later, because of her husband's cancer, she's now presumed